Martin Luther King had a dream. He dreamed of integration and racial justice. He dreamed of worldwide fellowship and quality education for everyone. He dreamed of a revolution that would reestablish the hope of democracy. He dreamed that the inherent promise of the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal, would be made real in the minds and hearts of all this country's people. Thank God he lived. Thank God he dreamed. And as a result of the sheer force of his courage and integrity, many aspects of Martin Luther King's dream have come true. The world is a different place now than it was in 1967 when he wrote the words that Reverend Cantor and I read a few moments ago. Segregation has ended. Laws have been changed, opportunities have been created, and I know that there are people in this room who have contributed to those struggles directly and indirectly, and thank God for those efforts too. But it's not over. King and the civil rights workers of his day dealt critical blows to the structures of racism, and the situation is different now. But there is a temptation, I think, to stop at congratulations, job well done, thank goodness that's changed. The fact is that there are many, many tragic ways in which racism still manifests. They are just harder to see, especially for those of us who are white. Take me, for example. I'm white. I was born in the Netherlands and grew up without needing to deeply understand race or how racism works. It's only been in my adult years that I have come to some awareness of my own race and racial history, a deeper context for who I have been and who I am now. I don't always notice this dissonance between my child self and my adult perspective, but it came sharply into focus very recently. This past Thursday, I had my regularly scheduled meeting with my resident support committee, the folks that help me reflect on my ministry here. It was our first meeting after the new year, and I wanted to give each person a token of my appreciation for their time and energy. It's a bit of a tradition in my family to give gifts that are unique to Holland, and this year, my mom had offered to buy a particularly special treat, a chocolate letter, which only appears in stores around St. Nicholas Day in December. So I ordered one for each of my committee members, and although the boxes were a bit crumpled after their travel adventure from the Netherlands, I'd bought some ribbon to jazz them up and was all ready to explain how chocolate actually does taste better after it's been tossed around in a suitcase for a while. But as the by now puzzled members of my committee who are here today already know, they never actually received this little gift. As I started taping ribbons on boxes, I noticed the cute little cartoon figures that poked their heads out from behind the image of each letter. They were images of Zwarte Piet, Saint Nick's mischievous sidekick, traditionally portrayed as not too smart but well-meaning. He's been an integral part of this holiday since before I can remember, and I have happy memories of going back to the dock to watch Saint Nick and Zwarte Piet sail in on their legendary boat from Spain. Although my inner Dutch girl is brought right back to my childhood by this holiday, the adult in me can't help but see a very different Zwarte Piet. In English, his name would be Black Peter. And when I took a second look at the cartoon on the box, I noticed more starkly his face portrayed as completely black, his lips colored a bright shade of red, his big curly hair and the Sambo-like smile on his face. Suddenly, the innocent character from my youth dissolved into an appalling, abusive stereotype. So there I was with these chocolate letters, this gift that I wanted to give. Part of my brain was looking for some way to fix it. Maybe I could just cross him out, or find some other way to frame it, or somehow change something that would make it okay. But I couldn't. The whole episode was making me late, so I left the letters in the cupboard under the desk, and I went upstairs to meet with my committee empty-handed. I don't know if any of you have ever had an experience like that, where some element of how things are is suddenly revealed to be a legacy of something entirely unacceptable. And you wonder to yourself, how could I have missed it? As I thought about it, I think I've been blind to the racism in St. Nicholas Day because for as long as I can remember, it has been treated by everyone as a benign children's story. Even today, I find it hard to reconcile these two realities. With one lens, this holiday somehow retains its childlike innocence, and with the other, I see a dismaying representation of a people who deserve complete respect, if not full reparations for what was done to them. The roots of this holiday reach deep into the time when the Dutch colonized the West Indies and took part in the slave trade. I can only imagine this distorted caricature was one way people had to distance themselves from the very real human beings whose lives they were destroying. Racism in this country looks a little different from the Netherlands, and I came face to face with that literally last weekend. I was at a workshop on undoing oppression, and fighting racism was a key theme. I got to hear women from nations all over the world, including the US, talk about their experiences as people of color. It was difficult. And it was very clear that the disparities that Martin Luther King was talking about have not changed nearly enough. There were stories of ostracism, of poverty, and of bone-numbing struggle, much of it caused by the financial disparities that are still such a part of racism's legacy. Recent figures from the Pew Center demonstrate this too, showing, for example, that the median wealth of white households is 20 times that of black households and 18 times that of Hispanic households. And even though the stories I heard that weekend were ultimately ones of overcoming against the odds, the difficulties of the situations these women described were pretty stark. But like my experience with St. Nicholas Day, I get the sense that here in the US too, there are ways that racism's effects are obscured. A CNN poll from a few years ago seems to affirm this. While most white and black Americans see racism as a lingering problem, few Americans of either race see themselves as racist, the poll showed. University of Connecticut professor and racism expert Jack DeVidio suggested we've reached a point where racism is like a virus that has mutated into a new form that we may not even recognize in ourselves. Contemporary racism is not conscious, he says, and it is not accompanied by dislike, so it gets expressed in indirect, subtle ways. An investigation by the National Fair Housing Alliance, for example, found that real estate agents steered whites away from integrated neighborhoods and steered blacks towards predominantly black neighborhoods. And an American Economic Review found that job applicants with black-sounding names received 50% fewer callbacks from employers than those with white-sounding names. Subtle, but striking. Like the real estate agents and employers in these studies, could biases of which we are not even aware be part of our consciousness? That's quite a question. I was talking to a friend of mine recently about all of this. She is a great person, smart and aware. And when I shared with her some of the ideas that I wanted to talk about in the sermon today, she said, "That's powerful, but it's too hard." She's a white woman with 2 children, always stretched to the limit in her own life. She's the kind of person who wants to do the right thing, but says she doesn't know what to do about any of it. And even if she did, she's just not sure where she would find the time or the energy. Her words and her tone both conveyed a sense of helplessness in the face of the demands of these issues. And I think she's not alone. It is hard to know what to do. I think many of us feel like we are not enough, we're too small, too limited, and the entrenched nature of racism as it still exists can leave us feeling like there's nothing we can do. And how on earth do you address a racism that you might not even be aware of? Yet, this is exactly why the work of Martin Luther King is still so important, and it still resonates so powerfully today. It is why this holiday is so critical for the health of our society and our world, because Dr. King was someone who fostered society-wide change against overwhelming odds. His work led to big, concrete successes, and so reminds us that big successes are possible for us, too. And his leadership reminds us that when we stand together, things can change. Another friend was saying to me yesterday that this is the time in the year when you can turn on your radio and actually hear the word hope. Not once, but again and again. We are reminded that our efforts matter and that we can make a difference. And we do. This congregation in particular takes actions of all kinds against the effects of racism. We are organizing against immigration injustices, have rallied around a refugee family from Bhutan. We teach ESL, volunteer at the food bank, are working for peace, volunteer with the UU United Nations, sponsor children in Ghana, lost boys from Sudan. We give money and time and engage in dozens of other ways to change circumstances for the underserved, a disproportionate number of whom are people of color. And simply your presence here today, as we reflect together on the legacies of racism and the antidote of awareness, is part of a larger turning tide which Martin Luther King did so much to foster. In fact, I think there is a way that simply being willing to face the tangled, heartbreaking issue of racism in all its forms is an important way of serving in the struggle against injustice. The more we see and understand the way that racism works in the world, but more importantly in us, the more we can authentically and open-heartedly connect across the divides that separate people from each other. And that may be one of the most important kinds of service we can do. So, I invite you to delve into your own history, the history of your family, your town, your country. How has race played a role in your life? How has it impacted your relationships? How has race created a context for who you are today, who you've been, or who you are becoming? One of my favorite Martin Luther King quotes goes like this: "Everybody can be great because anybody can serve. You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your subject and verb agree to serve. You only need a heart full of grace, a soul generated by love." When we bring the light of grace and love to what we do as well as to our own histories, we create a powerful double helix of action and awareness that begins to dissolve racism at its foundation. Racism began in the human heart, and although none of us created it, it's ours to deal with now. Whether it is the legacy of Dutch imperialism branded on a box of chocolate, or the legacy of slavery or other forms of racism woven into wealth and opportunity disparities still so prevalent in our communities, we have an opportunity to make a difference now. We can be a hero in our own lives to the people that we know, in the actions that we take, in the growing awareness we bring to the whole picture. And in that way, we too, one step at a time, along with Martin Luther King, continued to bring closer and closer his dream of true freedom. All of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, one day will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. Amen.